My parents gave my college fund to the neighbor's kid and made him spy on me for years. Now he took their house and they want my help. I, 27 male, needed to write this down to figure out if I'm wrong about this whole situation. This started back when I was 17, living in a middle-class neighborhood in Ohio with my parents. My mom, 52 female, worked as a high school teacher and my dad, 54 male, was an accountant. We weren't rich but lived comfortably. My parents always had a weird obsession with our next-door neighbors, especially their son Caleb, 24 male. Caleb moved into our neighborhood when I was 13. His dad worked in construction and his mom was a part-time receptionist. From day one, my parents were fascinated by him. He was that perfect kid, straight as, debate team captain, volunteered at the local shelter. My parents constantly compared me to him, saying how focused and hardworking he was while I just played video games and hung out with friends. I wasn't a bad student by any means. I maintained a 3.4 GPA, was on the school soccer team, and even made it to state competitions. I also helped run the school's gaming club and organized several successful charity gaming marathons. But nothing I did was ever good enough. If I got a B+, they'd ask why it wasn't an A like Caleb's. If I won a soccer match, they'd remind me how Caleb was focusing on his future instead of wasting time with sports. Things started getting weird around my freshman year. My parents began inviting Caleb over for dinner almost every night. They bought him a laptop for his birthday while I got a $50 gift card. They took him on our family vacation to Florida, giving him my window seat on the plane. I spent that entire week feeling like an outsider in my own family. They even started referring to him as our other son to relatives. I tried talking to them about how this made me feel. Mom would dismiss it, saying I was jealous of Caleb's success. Dad would launch into long lectures about how I should learn from Caleb instead of complaining. They'd invite him to my birthday dinners, family game nights, and holiday celebrations. Every family photo from those years has Caleb in it, usually standing between my parents while I'm off to the side. The real shock came during my senior year. I was applying to colleges and knew my parents had a college fund for me. They'd mentioned it throughout my childhood, telling me how they'd been saving since I was born. I'd even seen the statements sometimes when helping Dad organize his office. But when I asked about accessing it for application fees, they dropped the bomb. They'd given my entire college fund to Caleb because he needed it more. I remember that conversation like it was yesterday. We were having dinner, and they acted like telling me they'd given away my future was as casual as passing the salt. They said Caleb's grades made him more deserving of a good education. They told me I could take student loans or go to community college since I hadn't shown the same dedication to academics. I later found out they'd been giving him money for years. They paid for his SAT prep courses, his school trips, and even bought him a car for his 16th birthday. All while telling me we couldn't afford extra expenses. The college fund was just their final betrayal. My grades dropped after that revelation. It's hard to focus on studying when you discover your parents have been financially and emotionally replacing you with a neighbor kid. My school counselor noticed something was wrong, but I was too embarrassed to tell her the truth. I moved out right after graduation. Found a cheap apartment with 2 roommates and enrolled in state university with student loans. I worked part-time at a local game store and did food delivery on weekends to make ends meet. My parents called occasionally, but I kept conversations short. They never apologized or acknowledged what they did was wrong. Instead, they'd tell me how well Caleb was doing in his fancy private university, how proud they were of their boy. Things got interesting last month. My parents called me crying. Apparently, Caleb had bought their house through some legal loophole they didn't understand. He'd given them 30 days to vacate. They were shocked because they thought of him as a son. The irony wasn't lost on me. They begged me to help them fight this legally or let them move in with me. I refused. I told them they made their choice years ago when they chose him over their own son. They called me heartless and said I was being petty about ancient history. But this wasn't about revenge. They betrayed me, replaced me with a neighbor kid, and now that same kid turned on them. It's almost poetic justice. My aunt called saying I should help because they're still my parents. But these are the same parents who watched me struggle with student loans while paying for someone else's education. The same parents who made me feel worthless in my own home. My mom's been posting on Facebook about having an ungrateful son who won't help his elderly parents. They're only in their early 50s. I blocked them on everything. Some relatives think I'm being cruel, but others who know the full story support my decision. My wife, 26F, who I met in college, thinks they're manipulative and agrees we shouldn't get involved. I don't feel guilty. They chose Caleb as their son, so they can ask him for help. I'm done being their backup plan. Update 1. This situation got messier than I expected. Caleb reached out through LinkedIn last week and asked to meet. I was hesitant at first but agreed out of curiosity. We met at a local coffee shop, and what he revealed shook my entire understanding of my teenage years. According to Caleb, my parents approached him shortly after his family moved in. He was 16 at the time. They invited him over one day when I was at soccer practice and made him an offer. They would pay for his entire college education if he would pretend to need academic help and befriend me. They wanted him to influence me to be more studious and ambitious like him. But that wasn't all. They promised him their entire estate, the house, their savings, everything, if he'd help manipulate me into becoming who they wanted me to be. They had it all planned out. Caleb was supposed to casually mention his study techniques, talk about his college plans, and subtly push me toward their ideal version of success. He showed me years of emails between them. Every Sunday night, he had to send them detailed reports about our interactions. What we talked about, how I responded to his suggestions, whether I seemed interested in his academic activities. They would reply with instructions about what topics to bring up next, what activities to suggest, even what careers to mention casually in conversation. The emails made me sick. Every time Caleb came over to play video games, every movie night, every study session, it was all orchestrated. My parents would tell him in advance what to say, how to act, even what snacks to pretend were his favorites so I might start liking them too. There were detailed discussions about my personality. My mom would write things like, "He seems resistant to discussing business schools, try mentioning engineering instead, or talk about your debate team victory again, maybe he'll finally join." My dad would add notes about what manipulation techniques seemed to work best on me. The house situation wasn't random either. When Caleb turned 18, my parents had legally promised him the house in writing. It was part of their agreement, he would get their assets as long as he kept trying to influence me. He just decided to claim it earlier than planned because he needed capital for his new tech startup. Caleb said he felt guilty as he got older and realized how messed up the situation was. But he came from a struggling family, and the promise of financial security was too tempting to give up. He admitted he genuinely enjoyed hanging out with me sometimes, which made him feel even worse about the deception. He also revealed something that made my blood boil. My parents had been actively badmouthing me to the neighbors for years. They would host dinner parties when I was away at college and paint themselves as victims of an ungrateful, rebellious son who rejected their guidance. Meanwhile, they'd praise Caleb as the son they wished they had. My parents even tried to interfere with my relationship with my wife when we were dating. They reached out to her parents through mutual friends, warning them about my lack of ambition and suggesting she could do better. Thankfully, her parents ignored them. Caleb showed me recent texts from my parents too. Even after he took their house, they were still trying to manipulate him. They suggested that if he helped them get me to forgive them, they would sign over their retirement accounts to him as well. They saw nothing wrong with trying to buy someone's help in manipulating their own son. He's not backing down about the house. Legally, it's his property now. But he wanted me to know the truth because he's starting a family of his own and realized he wouldn't want anyone treating his child this way. He apologized for his part in it, though he acknowledged that an apology doesn't make up for years of deception. I spent hours reading through all the evidence he provided. Emails, texts, legal documents, everything. It was like reading a manual on how to emotionally manipulate your child. They had spreadsheets tracking my behavior, noting what pressures worked best, documenting every time I failed to live up to their expectations. The most disturbing part was how clinical it all was. They didn't seem to care about my happiness or well-being at all. Every interaction was measured by whether it moved me closer to their goals. They saw me as a project to be managed, not a son to be loved. I thanked Caleb for telling me the truth and left. Spent the whole night processing everything. My wife held me while I alternated between anger and disbelief. How could parents do this to their child? How could they spend years orchestrating such an elaborate deception instead of just accepting and supporting their son? I've decided to confront them with this evidence. They need to know that their perfect plan has been exposed. I want to hear them try to justify treating their child like a social experiment. Maybe then they'll understand why they're losing their son forever. Update 2. The confrontation with my parents went exactly as poorly as I expected. I emailed them all the evidence Caleb shared and demanded a meeting. They agreed to meet at a local diner, probably thinking they could manipulate the situation in a public place. When I arrived, they were already seated in a corner booth, looking nervous but still somehow smug. Instead of apologizing, they tried to defend their actions. Mom said they were trying to help me become successful through creative parenting. Dad called it a necessary intervention for my own good. But as I kept pushing, more truths came out. Mom finally admitted they'd actually sabotaged several of my college applications. They created a fake email account in my name and sent withdrawal emails to universities where I'd applied. They specifically targeted schools that had strong gaming or esports programs because they didn't want me wasting my potential. They'd also lied to our extended family about the whole situation. The story about my college fund helping a struggling neighbor kid was completely fabricated. Caleb's family wasn't struggling at all. His dad owned his own construction company and his mom worked part-time by choice. My parents just preferred him over me and wanted to ensure he felt indebted to them. Dad revealed they'd been planning this since I was in middle school. They'd noticed I was too interested in gaming and not enough in traditional careers. Instead of supporting my interests or trying to understand them, they decided to find someone to reprogram my personality. They'd interviewed several kids in the neighborhood before choosing Caleb. They liked him because he was ambitious but also good at relating to people, perfect for their manipulation scheme. They admitted to coaching him on how to befriend me, teaching him about games so he could accidentally run into me at the game store. The more they talked, the more disturbing details emerged. They had a whole network of parents in the neighborhood reporting back to them about my activities. If someone saw me at the arcade or game store, they'd hear about it. They used this information to coordinate Caleb's spontaneous appearances in my life. They even tried to sabotage my gaming club's charity events. They contacted other parents and suggested the events were a waste of time, hoping low attendance would discourage me. When that failed, they started scheduling family obligations on event days to prevent me from organizing them. The family is now completely divided. My Aunt Sarah cut contact with them after learning they'd used her to spy on me during college. She used to live near my university and now feels horrible about reporting back to them about my activities. My Uncle Tom still thinks I should forgive them because they meant well and family is family. My cousin shared screenshots of Mom's private Facebook posts where she's still playing victim. She's telling everyone how ungrateful I am, how they sacrificed everything to give me a better life. She conveniently leaves out the part about orchestrating a years-long manipulation scheme. Dad's been calling my old teachers and mentors, trying to get them to reach out to me. He's spinning some story about how they were trying to protect me from gaming addiction. Several people have messaged me expressing concern, having no idea about the real situation. What's even more frustrating is that they still don't see anything wrong with what they did. They genuinely believe they have the right to control and manipulate my life because they're my parents. Mom actually said she'd do it all again because sometimes parents know better than their children what's best for them. I've started writing everything down, all the manipulation, the lies, the sabotage. Several family members have suggested therapy for them, but they refuse to acknowledge they need help. They're still convinced they're the victims in this situation. The worst part is discovering that every major disappointment in my teenage years was orchestrated by them. Those college rejections that shattered my confidence? They're doing. The friends who suddenly stopped inviting me to gaming events? They'd talk to their parents. Even my first girlfriend breaking up with me might have been influenced by their meddling. I'm done. There's no coming back from this level of betrayal. They didn't just fail as parents, they actively worked to harm my future because it didn't match their vision. They're not just toxic, they're dangerous, and I want nothing to do with them. Update 3. My parents lost the house as expected. They're living with my Aunt Jessica now and still trying desperately to contact me. They've been using different numbers, creating new email accounts, and even tried sending messages through my gaming accounts. The desperation would be sad if it wasn't so infuriating. They sent a long email last week about how they've realized their mistakes but think I'm being too harsh. According to them, they deserve another chance because they genuinely thought they were helping me. They said they've learned their lesson after losing their house and want to rebuild our relationship the right way. Mom wrote about how she cries every night thinking about how things turned out. Dad added that they're seeing a family counselor who's helping them understand where they went wrong. But in the same email, they still defended parts of their actions, saying they only wanted what was best for me and that sometimes parents have to make difficult choices. I sent back a short response telling them to never contact me again. I made it clear that they chose to orchestrate an elaborate scheme to manipulate their own child instead of just being supportive parents. They destroyed our relationship because I wasn't exactly who they wanted me to be, and now they have to live with those consequences. Some relatives arranged a mediation meeting at my grandparents' house, but I declined. There's nothing to mediate. You can't compromise with people who spent years deceiving you and sabotaging your future. My uncle might keep saying I'll regret this when I'm older, but I think I'd regret more letting them back into my life. My wife is 4 months pregnant now, and it's really put things in perspective. I can't imagine ever treating my child the way they treated me. We've decided our child will never know them. They don't get to be grandparents after failing so spectacularly at being parents. The latest development is that they've started telling people they're getting professional help and working on themselves. But my cousin told me it's just another manipulation tactic. They're only doing it because someone told them it would look good to the family. In private, they still maintain they did nothing wrong. Caleb reached out again to let me know they've been harassing him too, demanding he sell the house back to them. He's filed a restraining order after they showed up at his workplace multiple times. Apparently, they're telling everyone he brainwashed me against them. I've moved forward with my life. My gaming channel is doing well, I got promoted at work, and we're expecting our first child. I'm living the life they tried so hard to prevent me from having, and I'm happier than I've ever been. Some people say I'm being cold, that everyone deserves forgiveness. But forgiveness is earned through genuine remorse and changed behavior. My parents are just sorry they got caught and lost their house. They're sorry their plan failed. They're not sorry for what they did to me. The extended family has mostly stopped trying to intervene now. I think seeing my parents' continued manipulation attempts has convinced most of them that I made the right choice. You can't heal a relationship when the other person refuses to acknowledge the real problem. My wife and I are looking at houses in another state now. With the baby coming, we want a fresh start away from all this drama. My parents can keep playing victim to whoever will listen, but they won't be part of our lives. They lost that privilege when they chose their perfect imaginary son over their real one.